Thank you very much. I don't think I've heard that song before, and I love those words. We talk about nature, the different things in nature being all part of the symphony or the orchestra. Good morning. It's good to be with you. I did speak here many years ago, and so it's been quite a while. But it's good to be back, and have so much to say. I don't know if I can remember it. But anyway, yes. Just a word or two about Camp Hope, and thank you, David, for that introduction. I was thinking, hey, just let's make sure we stay real here. But anyway, no, it's been an honor to serve the community with the evacuations and the stranded people and what have you. It's been a blessing for the camp to do that. And thank you for your support. Couple little things, little nuts and bolts. We put a new hot water system into the lodge. I don't know if any of you are on Facebook, but there is a Camp Hope page, and I try to keep pictures of things we do. And so we just did that recently. So now if you're there and you're staying at the very extreme ends of the lodge, you won't have to wait 10 or 15 minutes for the hot water to get to you. There is a circulation pump that hasn't been working. I didn't realize that, and so we have a new one. And when you turn the hot water on for your shower, you can, within a few seconds, you'll get your hot water and don't have to wait and wonder if we're out of hot water. So it seems like, so when I say Camp Hope is in hot water now. Anyway, okay, I've got a lot to say, and you guys, so I've got a half an hour to say my 60 minutes worth, so I will try and keep it short, but I'm a bit of a storyteller, and today, let's see, so our title is Three Storms. Actually, it started out being 5 storms, and it was too long, so then I shortened it to 4 storms, and it was still too long, so now we're only at 3 storms. So anyway, I'm not a pastor. I don't have pastoral training. Just Jesus chose fishermen to work with him, and I was a fisherman. So I know when pastors get up, sometimes they have to validate why they can talk about certain things. So I'm just trying to follow their lead here. So I was a commercial fisherman for a number of years. I started at 16 years old, and worked my way. Paid my last few years of high school and then worked my way through college. And then after I graduated from college, I went back to fishing. So in all, I worked parts of 21 years in the commercial fishing industry. So I think the last time I spoke with you, and hopefully most of you have a poor memory, so you don't say, man, that guy's just one track. I talked to you about a fishing experience where we caught lots of fish, just like Peter had caught lots of fish, and he filled up 2 boats. I was able to almost fill up 2 boats too, and then we drew some spiritual lessons from that. So with that fishing background, when I've read some of the stories in the Bible, all of a sudden, after I left the fishing industry and I kind of look back, all of a sudden some of these stories really resonated with me. And so this story today about the storm, when I read it, it just caught my attention because I've been in storms too, and I'm going to share a story about that today. And so I want to elaborate a little bit on that. So now, Pastor Torres said, would you take your trumpet and surprise them with a song? And so I brought it, and I know my talk is a bit longer, so I will play a short little something just so I can tell him that, yes, I did. I did. Maybe if you ask me back, if I'm not too long-winded today, I'd love to tell you the story about this old trumpet here, finding it in someone's garage, or buying it out of someone's garage and it being really in poor condition. But the truth is that it's a handmade trumpet, and at the time the maker, he was a real craftsman, and so there's some neat story I like to tell about this. Doesn't look like much, but at one side, it's like us as humans. If we fall on hard times, God we're reborn inside, and we can be beautiful noise. Or we can preach or speak for him so we can, anyway, I won't ruin my whole talk. Dave, we'll have to play together sometime. When you play softly, you keep taking air in, you don't really get rid of your air. So for me, I got a little, okay, let's get going here. So, as you heard in the scripture, that was in Luke, right? There's 3 accounts of the disciples in this storm. And so in Luke, it doesn't really sound that dramatic, does it? It sounds, well, we were in a storm and we were afraid, but we survived, kind of an attitude. Let's go over to Matthew really quick. Matthew 8:23. See what Matthew wrote about that storm. Then he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Without warning, a furious storm came up on the lake so that the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. Oh, thank you. The disciples went and woke him, saying, Lord, save us, we're going to drown. He replied, you have little faith. Why are you so afraid? Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, what kind of man is this? Even the winds and waves obey him. So it kind of sounds like, yeah, there's a little bit of drama there, but not that much. For the sake of time, I'm not going to read the next one, but it's pretty much the same. Okay, all these disciples' accounts are pretty much the same, I think, except in one of them, they talk about Jesus was on a cushion. So one of the disciples was taking a little closer notes, I guess, back then. Well, good story. But then one day when I was reading The Desire of Ages, the story came alive. And that's chapter 35. And I'm going to share part of that with you because the drama is so amazing here. Now, if I walk around, can your camera still see me? Okay, because I'm going to, it's storm here, and I can't just stand in one place here. The boat's going to be rocking here. So here we have Jesus has been preaching by the Sea of Galilee. He's been sharing some of his parables for the first time. Various ones. If you read this, there's some. I won't go through them all. But anyway, all day long it says here Jesus was teaching and healing. And as evening came on, the crowds pressed on him day after day, not just one day, day after day. So it's like he was having a whole series of meetings. It's like maybe an evangelistic seminar or something. Jesus was ministering to him, scarcely pausing for food or rest. Not only that, but there was the criticism that followed him around, and the Pharisees, and that affected him too. Mentally, that it had some weight on him. And it said here that his labors were more severe, making his labors more severe and harassing. And now at the close of the day, and we don't often think of Jesus like this, he was so utterly wearied that he was determined to seek retirement to some solitary place across the lake. So they wanted to go to the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee because it wasn't quite as inhabited as much, and he knew it'd be quieter, and there weren't many believers over there. And so he asked the disciples to take him there. And after he dismissed the multitude, they took him, even as he was, into the boat and hastily set off. But they were not to depart alone. Now, can you blame the people? Here's a man who was healing. Here's a man who was helping your child who maybe couldn't walk or had some disease or cancer or whatever. And this man was healing. And then, of course, the words they were hearing was something they had never heard before. So I cannot blame the people that wanted to see more and more of him. It says, and so they were not to depart alone. There were other fishing boats lying near the shore. And remember, if you do remember my last talk, we talked a lot about a fishing boat, right? Peter's fishing boat. And so there were other ones. I guess they weren't fishing. They didn't usually fish in the day because they couldn't catch fish. The water was so clear. And those boats quickly filled up, and the people followed Jesus, eager still to see and hear him. Okay, here we go. Are you guys ready? I hope you took some gravel this morning because we're about to go into a storm. This is storm number 1. Oh, okay. I always forget to press the button here. So this is our pastors went to the Holy Lands a number of years ago. Some of them did, and this was in a museum there, and they think this was a boat that size that Peter might have fished with, and they based that on the fact that they found a boat in the sand somewhere, and they took out what was remaining, and this is what they put together with. So that's why they think that was probably now. They must have had some bigger boats too, because you're not going to fit a lot of disciples in that boat, not unless they were very, very small disciples. All right, so these are some. I just found some different artist depictions of them crossing. So the Savior was at last relieved from the pressure of the multitude, and overcome with weariness and hunger, he lay down in the stern of the boat and soon fell asleep. The evening had been calm and pleasant, and quiet rested upon the lake. But suddenly, didn't really talk about suddenly too much. Suddenly, darkness overspread the sky. The wind swept wildly down the mountain gorges along the eastern shore, and a fierce tempest burst upon the lake. Now, when I was fishing, we had to take a course called Masters 4, and so we learned about weather, and there was one called a katabatic wind. And this is when, on a hot day, when the sun will shine down, say, on the mountains along, say, the inside channel here from Campbell River up to Port Area. You're on a channel, and there's mountains and things, islands on each side. The sun will beat down, and the heat from the mountains, as they absorb the heat, they rise, and that creates a bit of a vacuum. Then colder air rushes in, and it can create kind of instant storms. And it can be, there's places along as you travel up the inside passages there where typically there can be some really rough water. I've been through some of those. So out there on the Sea of Galilee, yes, they say it kind of does its own weather. So this fierce tempest bursts upon the lake. And whether it was purely weather or whether there was a force behind it that was not happy with Jesus, I don't really know. The sun had set, and the blackness of night settled down upon the stormy sea. The waves, lashed into fury by the howling winds, dashed fiercely over the disciples' boats and threatened to engulf it. Those hardy fishermen who had spent their lives upon the lake and had guided their craft safely through many a storm, but now their strength and skill availed nothing. So this is kind of like the perfect storm. I don't know if you ever saw that movie many years ago. 3 different weather systems came together and these fishermen were in the storm of their lives, and some of the boats sank, and some of the men lost their lives. So this is like the perfect storm, like 2,000 plus years ago. They were helpless in the grasp of the tempest, and hope failed them as they saw that their boat was filling. Now, we must remember, they didn't have lights, they didn't have an engine, they didn't have radar, they didn't have a safety raft and life rings, and maybe they had a bailing can. I hope they did. So here they're in the storm of their lives. They were helpless in the grasp of the tempest, and hope failed them as they saw their boat filling. Now it was really dark, and they weren't seeing anything. Absorbed in their efforts to save themselves, they had forgotten that Jesus was on board. Do we ever find ourselves in that situation where we're in our storm and we forget that Jesus is on board? My story later on is going to share a little bit about that. Now, seeing their labor vain and only death before them, they remembered at whose command they had set out to cross the sea. In Jesus was their only hope. In their helplessness and despair, they cried, "Master, Master!" But the dense darkness hid him from their sight. So from the middle of the boat to the back of the boat, because remember Jesus was in the stern, they couldn't even see him, right? It was so black. And when you can't even see, I remember one time I was traveling up in the going through a place called Seymour Narrows, which is just above Campbell River. And the water can run like up to 20 knots there. It's really narrow. When the tide comes in, it bottles up, and it can be really rough. There's whirlpools, and all the water that comes sucks down. There's upwellings. The water comes up in places, and they can just throw you around. And I remember turning my spotlight. I was going through there, and turned my spotlight on, and and it was so scary. I turned it off, and I was just standing like this on my wheel. Just my legs are kind of shaking, and I'm steering. Then, and I decided I didn't have my tide book. My tide book had run out of time, and I was traveling, so I slowly got out and waited and had to. Anyway, I made it through, but sometimes it's better not to see what you're up against. And obviously, these disciples couldn't see either. So the dense darkness hid him from their sight. Their voices were drowned by the roaring of the tempest, and there was no reply. So not only was it rough, it was noisy, right? In the wind, when the wind blows, it whistles through the rigging, and you can hear it kind of screaming, and just, there's another one. Doubt and fear assailed them. Had Jesus forsaken them? Was he who had conquered disease and demons and even death powerless to help his disciples now? Was he unmindful of them in their distress? Again they call, but there is no answer except the shrieking of the angry blast. Okay. Already their boat is sinking. A moment, and apparently they will be swallowed up in the hungry waters. Suddenly, a flash of lightning pierces the darkness, and they see Jesus lying asleep, undisturbed by the tumult. Now that amazes me. Because if I was in a really rough water, and I was on the boat as a crewman, I would take my pillow, which the crew's quarters was down in the bow of the boat. I'd take my pillow, and I'd come up into the galley where we would have our meals, right? And I would sleep on the bench there. For one, if you're in a boat, there's a lot of action right up at the front and right at the back. In the middle is there's less action there. So there wasn't so much rolling around, and plus too, if the boat decided to roll over or something, you were a lot closer to the door. But Jesus was in the stern, so he was getting the full effect. Like if you go on the at the P&E, you go on to the why can't roller coaster? Sometimes I can't think of words. I'm getting too old to remember all my words anymore. And and the people want to get in the very back because that's the part that whips around, and it's either in the front or the back because those are most exciting. But Jesus was sleeping in the stern. That tells you how tired he was. A moment, and they will be swallowed up in the hungry waters. Suddenly, this lightning flashes, and they see him lying there peacefully. In amazement and despair, they exclaim, "Master, Carest thou not that we perish? How can he rest so peacefully while they are in danger and battling with death? So here they're fighting for their lives. They're trying to keep their bow pointing into the waves, and they're trying to keep water from flooding them, and whatever they can do. And their cries arouse Jesus. As the lightning's glare reveal him, they see the peace of heaven in his face. They read in his glance self-forgetful, tender love, and their hearts turning to him cry, Lord, save us, we perish. This next line, if you don't remember anything today, this next line, never did a soul utter that cry unheeded. Okay? Lord, save us, we perish. It says, never did a soul utter that cry unheeded. As the disciples grasp their oars to make a last effort, Jesus rises. He stands in the midst of his disciples while the tempest rages, while the waves break over them, and the lightning illuminates his countenance. He lifts his hand, so often employed in deeds of mercy, and says to the angry sea, peace, be still. Now, this is amazing here. If you've ever been in a storm, you know that it usually takes hours for it to settle down. The wind slowly dies down. You know, if it's a 60 knots or 50, they slowly decrease, and the waves slowly get smaller, smaller. It says here, the storm ceases. The billows sink to rest. The clouds roll away, and the stars shine forth. The boat rests upon a quiet sea. It doesn't say over the next 24 hours it did this. It sounds like it happened, like boom, it happened. Then, because it says, then turning to his disciples, Jesus asks sorrowfully, why are you fearful? Why are you so afraid? Have ye not yet faith? It says, a hush fell upon the disciples. Even Peter, you know, the man who likes to blurt out things and speak his mind. Even Peter did not attempt to express the awe that filled his heart. The boats that had set out to accompany Jesus had been in the same peril with that of the disciples. Terror and despair had seized their occupants, but the command, it's interesting, it doesn't say any 5 boats sank. It doesn't say 1 boat sank. It doesn't say they lost anyone. No one fell overboard. No one drowned that night. But these other boats too, that weren't even fishermen that had fished all their lives. They weren't strong guys that had been hauled nets and rowed boats and stuff. These were the average Joe people, right, that just wanted to hear Jesus with their sick. We know with the people that were looking for healing. They were there. Terror and despair had seized them, and the command of Jesus brought quiet to the scene of tumult. The fury of the storm had driven the boats into close proximity. Now, you historians, was there not a Spanish armada many, many years ago that was sailing to invade somewhere, like France or England or somewhere, and then some big storm came along and just wrecked this armada? I think so. I don't remember the details, but isn't that what storms do? If you're a tugboat and you're hauling a whole long train of logs, to the sawmill, a big storm comes along, it blows it all apart, right? But this storm, it says, that drove the boats into close proximity, and all on board beheld the miracle. So they saw Jesus, they saw him stand up. In the calm that followed, fear was forgotten. The people whispered among themselves, what manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? So when I read that, to me that just brought that story alive. The disciples just didn't elaborate on it, but Mrs. White really elaborates on it, and it helps you understand the fear. They literally thought they were going to die, and they were thinking this was their last time. So that was storm 1. How are we doing here? 12:22. Oh my goodness, we're only at storm 1. Okay, we better hurry here. Okay. Thank you for that water, David. Are you sure? Sometimes if I'm invited to speak up in Karamias or 100 Mile House, it's usually smaller churches, I say I get like 15 minutes per 100 kilometers. So you guys should, don't barely even get 15 minutes today. But we'll give you everything. Okay, now, in 1984, that's the fishing mode I was fishing on. It's called the Anawati. And it was in the fall, and we were, us on that boat, we were coming back from the Queen Charlotte Islands, heading back to the mainland. And you have to go, I think it's called Hecate Strait. And it's not super deep, and the waves can really build up and get really rough there. And we were going through a storm. It was about my sixth or seventh year. I hadn't gotten physically sick from the sea, and I had to keep this record. I've never thrown up. I'm a fisherman. I've never, But on that night, all records were out the window, and I didn't care. And so it was really rough. And so for us, as we crossed there, it was quite a long crossing. There was this lighthouse off in the distance, and as on my turn on the wheel shift, I was up there. I just kept my eyes on the lighthouse, and I knew that safety was there, and I kept there. And because in the storm, your boat will go this way, it's on autopilot, and then it'll go this way, and this way, and this way, and every once in a while you can't see it, but then that light would flash. And each of the lights actually have different timing, and charts will tell you, if it's like a flash every 5 seconds, or there might be a little one. So that's how you tell the different lighthouses. They have different timing sequences. So on that light, so there's a little lesson here. Always keep Jesus, God is our lighthouse, right? Jesus is our lighthouse. Always keep your eyes on him, right? Because that's where safety is. So while we were crossing up there, down off the west coast of Vancouver Island, this storm was hitting in a big, much worse way. We didn't know that. We were worried about ourselves there. Much later on, I found out about that. And the story I'm going to share with you, a modern day storm story, is written in this book here, Dangerous Waters by Keith Keller. And two of our church members from Port Hardy, two of our elders there, were skippers of boats, and they had been fishing down there. And as they were traveling home, and two of my good friends were on one of the boats as well, as they were traveling home, a storm hit. Our weather broadcasting skills weren't as good as they are now, and a storm hit much earlier and harder than anticipated. And an opening had just finished, and there was quite a few boats that were heading home. Now, when you're on the west coast of Vancouver Island, there's nothing out there except Japan, far away, and that's not going to help you. There's no, so the sea can be pretty wild, and there's really not many places to go on the west coast there to get in out of the weather. It's somewhere you don't want to be in a storm. And so, as these two good friends of mine, and this is boat, and I actually worked on that boat for 3 years, and that skipper in the story was my skipper and his good friend. Bruce Rayfuse is his name, and the other one was Murray McGill, long time Vancouver Island. And the McGill family they were part of that floating logging camp. I don't know if you ever heard of that. There was some Adventists that had a floating logging camp many years ago, and up and down the coast. So anyway, the story in here is this boat and the other boat were traveling back to an inlet, or to a harbor, and there was also 3 little boats that were traveling the same way. But the weather got so bad for the 3 little boats that 2 of them turned into what they thought was a good sheltering place. But the third guy couldn't. He was so small, the waves would have rolled him over, so he kept going. So the 2 boats called out to my friends Bruce and Murray on these boats, and they said, "Can you watch our guy? Can you watch our friend? He's out there." And so that's where they had just been communicating, and Bruce had told this guy, "Don't worry, we'll find you and we'll stay with you." Like, he basically said, we won't leave you. Now, have you ever heard that someone ever said something like that before? "I'll never leave you nor forsake you"? So when I read that, I almost got emotional. I almost got emotional. David introducing me. Thank you. I just like, oh man. So here we go, and I'll try and go through here. So what's happened here is this guy came and interviewed these two people. They interviewed Ray Fuse as the skipper, and then Datweiler is the guy in the little boat. So you're going to hear the back and forth, okay? So we heard Storm 1 was a storm 2,100 years ago or something like that. Storm 2 was 1984. I kept talking. This is Ray Fuse talking, the skipper, my friend. I kept talking to him, trying to get him to turn to starboard into Winter Harbor. But the waves were too bad. Okay? So they're traveling along here at about this time here, and they want to go in there. They want to get into this little harbor here, and that's where they can get out of the weather. And the two other little boats, they ducked into here and they anchored, thinking they could get out of the weather. So this is the north end of Vancouver Island here. Port Hardy is in that little divot right up there. That's where I lived for quite a few years. Now you know everything. The waves were too bad. Okay, I wanted him to turn to starboard into Winter Harbor, but the waves were too bad and he wasn't able to. As we got closer to Kane's Island Light, you can see that there, I'd tell Ken Datweiler, we're 8 miles now, 5 miles now, 3 miles, 2 miles, and 1.5. The total 10 miles we went together took over about 4 hours. It was getting worse. And I kept thinking he wasn't going to make it. I'd tell him, sure you'll make it. What else could I say? It must have been close to 4 in the morning. An inquiry later on, I'm not sure if it said the winds went up to 70 to 100 miles. Oh, it's a little coming up here. Must have been close to 4 in the morning. I found that if I put my bow in the wind and kept him on one of my sides and just idled, I'd go backwards as fast as he was going forwards. I'd have to have enough throttle to be able to steer the boat. Every once in a while, I had to turn around, and I realized by this time that he might not make it. And if I was ahead of him when he went over, I'd not see him, and I'd never find him in those seas. Datweiler, skipper of the little boat. According to reports, it blew between 70 and 100 miles an hour. The sea was 30 to 40 feet high. We're talking about the waves. The waves were 30 and 40 feet high. You couldn't see very much because of all the water. It was like being in rapids. Everything was foaming. I'd look out the back and say, there's no way my boat can handle this. I went out once because I heard something bang on the side of the boat. The boat had gone over so far it lifted the life ring off the side of the boat and put it in the water. I went out to try and get it, and I thought I was going over. So I said, no, don't worry. I kept carrying on, and then I told them that this was it. I knew that this was time, and I'm not going to come out of it. My pole was under the water. That means his boat was almost over on his side at this point. Ray Fuse. He called me Sailboat. This one time about 4:30 in the morning, he said, Sailboat, I think it's going over. His stabilizer pole was in the water, and he said, my prop's out of the water. I think it's going over. And then all this crackle. Then the lights went out, and I couldn't find him. I put my spotlight on, but he disappeared. I was only a few boat lengths away when he rolled over. Otherwise, there wouldn't have been any chance of finding him. The waves were over 30 feet. Datweiler, the guy in the little boat. I had the window on the one side open so I could get out. And I'm talking to him on the phone while the boat's filling up with water. When I climbed out, that's when I knew how bad it really was. I couldn't hang on. The water would come totally over the boat and me. His boat's on the side now. I kept going up with the water washing over the boat, but hanging onto the chain. Then I'd come back down. And I figured this wasn't good, so I stuck my legs in the fish locker, wrapped the chain around my arm, and hung on. So we had a survival suit, right? It's kind of like a diver's suit, but it's much more roomy. It's easier to climb in, and they have hoods on them. I couldn't get the hood of my survival suit on with one hand. That's when the Mistjoy came up to me, and he didn't even see me. Every time he turned his searchlight toward me, that's when a wave would come up between us, and he'd miss me. So now the boat is in, I'll try and paraphrase some of this. Now that his boat is rolled over in the water, he has a net, and he has lines and things. They're going to be floating in the water. So the other boat has to be really careful, because if he comes along and gets something like that in his wheel, that's going to render him, he can't right? If you get stuff in your prop, eventually it seizes up, and then it's just a matter of time before the wind blows you onto the beach. Okay, when Ken turned over, we were about straight out from Kane's Island Light. I imagine a mile or two. So they would be right about here. I don't know how long I looked for him. It wasn't that long. A person can't live in the water very long, I thought. Well, maybe we should just head for harbor, too. I thought I might have searched too far to the right, so I told Murray, my other friend in the other boat, I'd try one more pass to the left. I told the Lord that I knew we'd never find Ken unless we had help. And for all our sakes, we needed help. It'll tell you later on, but this boat he was on had rolled over 3 times previously, and I remember the first year I went on it was about 4 or 5 months after it rolled over the first time, and there had been the loss of 3 people on it, of 3 of our members up there. I made one more pass, and then I turned around. I saw the debris in the water. Talking to Ken later on, he said several times the spotlight had shone right on him, but then the waves came in between us. Ken was on top of his boat, and there was junk all around. I took my boat out of gear. I had to think twice about doing this because I knew we couldn't pick up with the boat still going forward. I thought he'd swim to my boat and then we'd pick him up. So then he's out on the boat trying to yell in the wind to this Datweiler. He was hollering at me, but the wind was so strong going through the stay wires. See the similarities between the storm here? The wind was strong and whistling in the wires. I can't hear what he's saying. But I know he wants me to go into the water, and I can't swim. Isn't that often the case in these situations? Someone can't swim. I didn't want to go into the water all that bad until he got close to me. There wasn't much of my boat left showing above the water, but I had let go. When I got into the water, he lost me. He turned around again and was coming back toward me, and I think that I kicked myself off the bow, and I was going to grab onto some of his rigging. My deckhand, this is the skipper of the big boat, suggested we throw the life ring. He tied it to our bow line and heaved it to Ken. The wind blew it right back. But Ken left his hull and slipped into the water and started drifting away from the boat, but not as fast as us. He had his survival suit on, but improperly, and it was filling up with water. When he got far enough away, I came upwind from him and drifted down on top of him. I took my boat out of gear and ran outside as we drifted down sideways. We just came rushing toward him, and as soon as we got to him, I threw him the life ring and told him to get in it. The little boat. He saw me and threw me a rope about 1 3/8 inches. This huge rope that big seine boats use, with a life ring on it that's too big for most human beings. It was a great big one, quite a bit bigger than the one on my boat. I got in it, but I was having trouble staying in it because my arms weren't long enough. Then the rope came off. Now I'm in the life ring that I can't stay in, and I'm floating away. Rayfuse, the skipper of the big boat. I gave him the rope and said, "Tie it back on." He said, "I can't, I'm too cold." You can imagine, they're yelling in the wind here, right? The current was already pulling him around the bow, and I said, this is Rayfuse, "You have to put it on." He said, "I'm too cold." I said, "Just put it through the ring and give it back to us." And he said, "I can't." He was up on the bow, and I said, "We have to pull you back here." And he said, "I can't hold on." Rayfuse says, "You have to hold on." He held on. We pulled him back, and he got the rope through somehow. I realized he was so weak at this point, he could slip out of the ring. But I figured we put this much effort into it, we weren't going to lose him now. "Kick your feet! Help us!" And he said, "I can't." The guy in the little boat. They couldn't lift me out of the water because I was too heavy. My suit is full of water now. So they got him back to the boat. Now the bow on the boat is quite a ways up above the level of water. A wave took me and threw me up on his boat to about my rib cage, right up near the bow of the boat. I mean, I don't know. I think that was maybe a little of a miracle. I think maybe the Lord was helping him there. I was able to reach behind a stay wire. He said something like, "Come on, Ken, you've got to help us." And Ken, the guy that they just came out of the water, says, "I'm not going anywhere." Rayfuse. I grabbed his suit and pulled him in. I think the rocking of the boat actually helped us get him in. Rayfuse said, "Okay, now come around. Let's get inside the cabin." I didn't know at that rate how long it would be before we'd be up on the beach. He said, "I can't move." So we coaxed him in. Somewhere along the way, I took my knife and slit the boots on his survival suit and let the water out. The guy in the little boat said, "I crawled. I looked like Sweet Pea." Remember Popeye? The little baby Sweet Pea? He says, "I crawled like Sweet Pea, actually in my nice red suit into the cabin." And they said, the deckhand said, "I'm really sick. Can I lay down?" And the guy said, "That's fine. I'm not going anywhere. I'm staying right here." Rayfuse said, "We got him in the cabin, and the deckhand came up and said, 'He wants a shower.'" I said, "He'd be beat to death in a shower." I said, "Give him a quilt and wrap him in it." Pretty soon, this is kind of interesting, pretty soon the guy they just rescued came up and says, "Do you mind if I smoke?" And Bruce said, "Oh, I don't have any cigarettes." The guy said, "I figured if I was going to survive, I'd need two things, my cigarettes and my wallet." Anyway, before he went over, he said, "I felt that Bruce was a religious man and he didn't smoke. I knew I was going to need a cigarette in the worst way, so I put 2 packages in my pocket. When I got on board, Bruce said he couldn't give me a cigarette, but he had lots of matches." And the guy said, "Well, I brought my own cigarettes." And Bruce said, "Well, that's a true smoker." Anyway, by the time they drifted to some islands that were downwind from Kane's Island, Murray, my friend in the other boat, was on the scene, and they had to go start going back around that point to get into Winter Harbor. There's Ken. That's the guy that's the boat that rolled over and was lost, and that's the fellow that was in the water that they pulled out. It was probably about daybreak that they went into Winter Harbor, and they were able to light their stove for a hot drink. Ken had a shower, and all guys phoned home and told their wives they were okay, and they went to pick them up. It was a joyous group that traveled to Port Hardy that afternoon. They were going to put Ken up for the night, but by the time he got to Port Hardy, the local pub looked pretty good to him, and he figured he needed to celebrate being alive. One of our friends there that wasn't a member of the church, he was there that night, and he called up Bruce, the guy that rescued him, and he said, "Bruce, you're the most popular guy in the pub tonight." In an ironic twist of fate, Ken owes his life at least partly to the fact that he was unable to follow his 2 friends' boats into that illusory shelter of Brooks Bay. That's where the 2 friends went. All 4 hands aboard those vessels perished during that night. The body of his friend was never found. In further irony, the rescue was accomplished by a vessel that had been involved in 1 fatal accident and 2 other rollovers at the time. It was a hull design that made it really rolly. And anyway, during that night, 7 vessels were lost and 5 lives were lost. It was one of the worst fishing things our province has experienced. And there were times in the storm where even the Coast Guard boat and the Fisheries Patrol vessel had to stay anchored up because they were too rough for them to go out in the water. So that was storm number 2. Storm number 3. You know, these are 2 physical storms, and we not many of us spend much time on boats and things, but we go through life. Life is like a journey, and we experience storms in our life, don't we? I had a storm, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. Not a highlight of my life, but so after fishing, I became we moved down from Port Hardy, and my wife was going to become a dental hygienist. She was a nurse that didn't really fall in love with being a nurse. And so she was going to become a dental hygienist, and so we moved down we were about to move down to the Fraser Valley, and due to the different grading system between the states where she went to Walla Walla and up here, she missed the cut by just little, because we don't have A pluses down there, and they do up here. So I ended up becoming the development director at Fraser Valley Adventist Academy for 7 years. And then after 7 years, and it was a good thing, because it's interesting. As I was fishing, there were times when I thought to myself, is this what I'm supposed to be doing? You know, we're basically just fishing for a living, right? I mean, we work for a living, right? But it just seemed like, I wondered if when I retired, if I'd think to myself, I must have had a greater calling in life. There must have been more I should have done. Maybe I should have been this or something else. So I was questioning myself about that. Well, and there was a time when, and this is a caution for you, when I actually said to myself, I'm doing pretty good at this fishing thing. When does this trust in God thing kick in? Oh boy. Now, I don't think I was arrogant. I don't think I was too prideful, but I got the wind knocked out there shortly thereafter, and I won't go into that story. But anyway, so when we left the island, there was I had done a loan with some friends of a significant amount, and that money disappeared on us. So that was a terrible thing. So all of a sudden, this I can take care of myself thing was out the window completely, and I was on my knees praying that God would help resolve this other financial issue with friends. Anyway, so after 7 years at the academy, I decided it was time for a change. So I went and I tried something different, and that didn't work out. And so then I was between careers. And that between careers at first was kind of neat. You know, as EI was coming in, and it's kind of neat. Like, you didn't have to get up and work every day. But as I looked for work, it just wasn't finding the career or the job. And I was praying for it, right? And I was praying to find another career, and it wasn't happening, and I felt that Jesus was sleeping in my stern. Like, isn't he hearing me? Like, does not hearing my prayers? Like, how come he's not answering? You know, I would go online and looking all the job, different things, and to be honest with you, when I got off the internet from looking at all these different postings, I'd feel dumber than when I went on. You know, it wasn't a fun time. You look back at your life and you think, well, I should have done this in college, or I should have done this in college, and Christmas time comes along and you get letters from your friends, all the neat things they're doing and the vacations they went on and stuff, and I'm don't have a career, and it's just, you're happy for them, and yet you're unhappy. And you know, you go to church and people say, how are you doing? Well, in the lobby you can't pour your heart out in everyone, so you just put your smile on and say, I'm doing fine. And you know, I had one or two friends that saw through that. But there were many times, I'll be transparent, I didn't want to go to church. I just felt like a failure. But I went because I wanted my kids to see their dad going to church, right? I wanted them to see that example. And I knew people would say, how you doing? What you doing? Or if I met someone new, oh, what do you do? Well, I'd always tell them what I used to do, right? Not what I was doing, because it's embarrassing to say, well, I'm between careers, God's not answering my prayers, and things like that. So it was quite a storm, right? Quite a storm psychologically. Just don't feel good about yourselves. With guys, a lot of your self-worth is having to do with your career, with your work, being able to support your family, bring an income in, and take care of things. And our line of credit was, you know, every once in a while we'd take a chunk of money, put it back on the mortgage and stuff. So anyway, I kept praying about it. And I have learned that when you ask God to, when you have a prayer, it's not always a yes or no, but it's when. The answer comes when. He's not that he won't answer, it's just, but we often hope for an answer right now, and it doesn't happen right now. And he's not saying no, it's just the timing isn't right. Anyway, eventually, So 4.5 years. 4.5 years. And I was doing odd jobs. I became a commercial painter briefly and commercial pressure washer. And so I have some good life experience. And I'm a much better painter now than I was before. And I know a good brush, and I know good paint, and I know how to fill in holes really good and sand them and things like that. So I learned some good skills during this time. But anyway, eventually the position at the camp came up, and I put my name in, and lo and behold, out of the 2 people that applied, they picked me. So now, fortunately, I had some fundraising experience from working at the academy, and the other fella didn't, and so I don't know. I wasn't on the picking committee, so anyway, I'm assuming that was one of the things. So, but anyway, so I've been at the camp almost 13 years now, and I think it's been a good match. We've been able to do a lot of things at the camp, and it's been a learning experience, and I feel more like the disciples became fishers of men, right, when they left their boats. Well, when I went to work at the academy, I kind of felt the same way. I left the boats and I became a fisher of men, or fisher of kids. And then now at the camp, I became a fisher of men. But I want to wrap this up now. You guys aren't fishermen. Maybe you are, I don't know. But I'm assuming, anyway, I kind of thought this talk, being close to the ocean here, was kind of, but I do have a few others that have nothing to do with fishing. Just so you know, I'm not a one I'm like so anyway, how many of us have ever had a financial storm? Just a challenge, maybe there's a bankruptcy, or even now with the interest rates taking off, if you weren't locked in on your mortgage and you went from a 2% mortgage up to 5%, that's huge. You know, all of a sudden you're finding your paycheck is gone on your mortgage. Marital. Well, we know within our church, we're not, you know, it hits us too. You know, marital things happen too. There's breakups and divorces and things. We're not immune to that. And that's a huge, huge one, right? That can just leave you feeling low. Depression. Seems like there's more and more depression these days, and even among the younger people, from what I'm reading. It's not just, you know, COVID did not help anything like that, but having 2 or 3 years where we become so isolated, and masks, and not going to school, and not being able to go to graduation, you know, all those things add up, right? Depression. Our young people, not just us older people, young people are dealing with depression. And then the social media, right? If you don't look like this person or dress like this person, you know, and then there's all this stuff that goes online where you know, people trash you online and stuff. And so, and we're reading about suicides now, and why? Because kids are making fun of each other, and kids can't live with that. And if they come from a home maybe that's broken, and they don't have parents that give them affirmation at home, or they don't have a community, you know, we're blessed to have our church communities, right? We have each other's back. We're friends. We know we can rely on each other for so many things. Sickness. How many have had a sickness that just doesn't seem to go away? How many would love to reach out and touch the hem of Jesus and know we be healed, or follow him in his boat so we know that, you know, there is a man who can heal the sickness? And the loss. We all have suffered loss. Some maybe recently, some maybe not so recent. Relationships, or whatever it is, whatever storm you're going through. I just want to encourage you. Like in my personal storm, 4.5 years was a long time, but as I look back now, it you know, was a little window in life, and you know, and there are some positives, because now if I ever speak to someone else that's maybe gone through the same thing, I understand them. Like, I used to help these stop smoking programs all the time, and I'm saying, eat your carrot sticks and drink lots of water. But I'd never smoked in my life. And so it seemed really easy to quit, right? If you do all these things, and you can do it, Put your lighter in that little box that looks like a help me out here. Coffin, thank you. I don't know why I can't think of words. And, you know, so I was doing things, but but I had never smoked. I didn't know how the demands of, on a smoker as they're trying to quit. But now in a situation like this, I understand. I know what a guy feels like. I know the mental battles that they have, and so I can really understand, and I like sharing, encouraging, right? And a lot of times that these things help us to relate to others who are going through the same things. So I just want to encourage you, don't give up. Whatever storm you're going through, just like the disciples, they went through the worst time they'd ever experienced. But Jesus was in the boat, okay? And when my friends were out on the Pacific Ocean, I think Jesus was in the boat. And in my storm that I went through, Jesus was in my boat too. And he slept a little longer than I would have liked to, but God's timing is perfect and ours isn't. So so eventually that prayer was answered. So I'm going to leave you with this. Jesus is a perfect Savior, captain, pilot, or steersman to guide us through every storm. Even when it appears like all is lost, as it did to the disciples, like they were so, can you imagine, here were the people that lived with Jesus. And here they were in the same boat, literally just a few feet or meters apart. And yet they had lost all their faith. So don't feel bad if you feel your faith is wavering, because that's a natural human thing. But just remember that, there's promises galore in the Bible, right? I will never leave you nor forsake you, and many, many others. So I just want to encourage you, whatever storm you're going through, have faith. Hold tight, right? Things off. During the night when it's the darkest, it always seems the worst, but then the morning comes and the light, and things will get better in time. And, it's all in God's timing. And sometimes it may, here on earth, it may not end up being as perfect as we hope, but we know there's a place where the perfection is going to happen. So I'm going to leave you with that. Thank you very much.
Amen.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Brother Bill, for the really timely message. We're all going through different storms, so let's pray for each other. We have this wonderful church family, which is really empowering. But let's remember that Jesus said, peace, peace, be still.
Amen.
I will call on the praise team now for the closing hymn, hymn number 534, Will Your Anchor Hold. Let's all stand.